My name is Daniel Horowitz. For 18 years, I worked for the United States Chemical Safety Board, or CSB, an independent federal agency that investigates chemical accidents, including 8 years as managing director. 5 years ago, on February 18, 2015, we learned of a major explosion at the Exxon refinery here in Torrance. Some days later, we sent a team of accident investigators to the site. What they learned there was alarming. Not only had the explosion threatened workers with death and injury, not only had the explosion showered the community with catalyst dust, but an even larger danger loomed. We learned from refinery personnel that huge pieces of debris from the explosion nearly struck a storage tank containing large volumes of hydrofluoric acid, or HF, perhaps the deadliest chemical widely used in refining. If the tank had been pierced, the lives of thousands of nearby residents could have been in peril. After CBS News publicized this serious near accident in the fall of 2015, there arose a strong community movement, including people here who a few months earlier had formed TRAA, to force California refineries to move away from using HF in favor of available, safer technologies. Other HF-related accidents followed, including a near release in Wisconsin and an actual release in Philadelphia last June. As you all know, the effort to phase out HF suffered a setback last year when the AQMD sided with the refining industry and voted to allow continued use of HF. This disappointing decision, however, is not the end of the road. TRAA's effort to rid California of HF dangers is part of a larger struggle that has been going on actually for decades, and that is how to require the oil and chemical industry to move toward what are called inherently safer technologies. And at the very top of that list, because it represents the greatest danger to the public, is to eliminate HF from the 47 refineries around the country that still use it. Safer, commercially feasible alternatives exist, as you've heard about today. What has been missing is a definite timetable from regulators requiring refineries to switch to these safer alternatives. Despite the AQMD's failure to act, across the country we are making progress. A federal law, the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments, gave the federal EPA broad authority to regulate the safety of chemical plants. Section 112R of the Act established the general duty of plants to identify hazards and to design and maintain safe facilities, and to minimize the consequences of chemical releases. In May 2014, the Chemical Safety Board, by a unanimous vote, issued perhaps the most important recommendation in its history. Following a deadly refinery explosion in Washington state, the CSB called on the EPA to require companies to analyze inherently safer alternatives. We also called on EPA to require companies to follow what is known as the hierarchy of controls. Under the hierarchy of controls, the first choice is to eliminate hazards wherever possible, rather than to accept the hazards and then try to control the risk. In the case of HF, where we know there are proven, safe, practical alternatives, this means eliminating HF rather than adding mitigation systems onto an inherently unsafe technology. So long as HF is used, it is a menace to public health and safety. In January 2017, a few days before President Obama left office, the EPA took some positive steps in the direction of the CSB's recommendation. The EPA required that certain sectors, including refineries, at least perform a documented analysis of safer alternatives. Unfortunately, these regulations were immediately targeted for repeal by the Trump administration. Environmental groups such as Earth Justice are now suing the administration to try to block this repeal effort, and the issue is now headed to federal court. The outlook in California is more positive. In August 2012, there was a serious fire at the Chevron refinery in Richmond, which is along the East Bay of San Francisco. Following an extensive investigation, the Chemical Safety Board recommended that California require the analysis and use of inherently safer technologies. California embraced these recommendations, and in October 2017, Cal OSHA issued new rules that specifically require refineries to perform the detailed analyses recommended by the CSB with a focus on eliminating hazards, and California went even further, requiring refineries to implement the recommendations of their own internal teams that analyze inherent safety measures. The new rules give refineries 3 to 5 years to perform these safety reviews on their existing processes. So these reviews are underway right now. Whether they turn out to be just paper exercises or whether they lead to real reform is going to depend on groups like TRAA. It's going to come down to how much pressure comes from the public. The good news is that in California, at least, there is a legal mechanism in place to push refineries to do the right thing and to protect the public. Other positive developments are underway. Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, or PEER, an environmental group, is pressing the Chemical Safety Board to release its records from the Exxon investigation that should finally shed light on exactly how dangerous the HF is that's stored at the refinery. These records may finally lay to rest the idea, promoted by the refining industry, that the use of HF modifiers, or chemicals that are added to HF to reduce vapor formation, is all that is needed to make HF safe enough to use in populated areas. PEER has also filed a petition with the federal EPA demanding that the agency use its authority under 2 existing federal statutes to ban HF from refineries. President Trump's EPA administrator has denied the petition, and that issue may eventually be heading to federal court as well. And the CSB itself has won an important legal victory against Exxon before the U.S. Court of Appeals, finally winning the right to examine certain key documents about the HF near disaster here in 2015. These are documents about HF hazards that Exxon has been fighting for 5 years to keep from public view. Once again, the key to making this effective is going to be public engagement. Groups like TRAA should work with elected officials, leaders like Governor Newsom, Representatives Liu, Waters, Lowenthal, and Berrigan, to ensure that the CSB follows through on this legal victory, collects the information from Exxon to which it is now entitled, and issues a well-documented public report of what is found, and does so on an expedited schedule. Depending on what is found, even the AQMD may have to reconsider the appropriate path forward, and I hope that they do so. None of that is likely to happen without the involvement of TRAA and other community groups. So my overall message today is that there are a number of paths forward at the federal, state, and local levels. You are not alone. Other organizations around the country share your commitment and your concern. Despite the setback at AQMD, there is no single community in the U.S. that has progressed these issues as far along as you have here in Torrance. Keep up the good fight. There is no reason, either technological or economic, why communities should be exposed to the kinds of risks posed by large-scale use of HF at refineries. Thank you, and good luck.